Now, over the years, I've had many requests about how to configure Adblock for your Tailnet. Like, Alex, what is your optimal Tailscale Tailnet DNS configuration setup? What does that look like? Well, in today's video, I'm going to take you through one of those best case scenarios, how to set up Pihole with your Tailnet. And the cool part about this is you can see per client metrics. Let me just show you that real quick. You can see per client metrics about the ad blocking that's going on inside your Tailnet from Pihole when it's hooked up to Tailscale. Now, I don't necessarily endorse Pihole specifically over any of the other DNS options that are available. I'll talk a little bit later in the video about AdguardHome and Technitium, for example. But Pihole certainly is one of the more popular options in this space. It's an ad blocking tool that has essentially like a list of known advertising domains and just blocks them at the DNS level. Now, I'm going to assume that you have somewhere to run this already. I mean, it literally could just run on a Raspberry Pi 0W2 for like $30, I think, on Amazon at the time of recording. This could also run as a virtual machine on top of Proxmox. In fact, that's what I'm going to be doing in today's video, and I'll cover all the steps of how to install it and all that stuff. You could also run this in a VPS, so you could have a virtual private server somewhere on the internet, completely locked out of being accessible to the internet at large, and then have it accessible just via Tailscale and lock it down real good like. So it's up to you. There are many different ways to run Pihole. There's no one right way to run it. So I'm just going to try and keep things simple today and just put Pihole inside a virtual machine, inside my local network, and then hook it up to Tailscale so that I can get this ad block goodness wherever I am in the world. I can route all those packets, those DNS requests back to my house, from the coffee shop, from the airport, from a different continent even, and have that ad block wherever I am. Installing Pihole is extremely straightforward. In fact, I'll put a link to this documentation in the description down below, but essentially you copy this one command to your clipboard, SSH into your host that's going to be acting as your DNS node. In my case, I've created a VM on 192.168.1.53. I always like to put the DS node on IP address 53 because I'm a nerd, and DNS uses port 53, so IP address 50, whatever, it's a nerd thing, whatever. Essentially, though, to install Pihole, you just copy this one command to your clipboard and paste it in. Now, I'm not root user on this node, so I'm going to put in my root password. Pihole is going to install itself, and here is probably the single biggest piece of useful advice that the installer will give you. This server must have a static IP address. Now, it is talking about a static IP address inside your local network. And that's because you want to configure your DHCP server to hand out this IP address every time a client inside your LAN gets an IP address. Every time a device connects to your Wi-Fi or you plug in an Ethernet cable, you will talk to a device in your network called a DHCP server. That DHCP server will give that device an IP address, usually 192.168.1. something. In this case, you're taking one of those IP addresses and making it a static address within inside that DNS, that DHCP range, I should say. And so it's really important that your Pihole has a static map, a static IP mapping within inside your local network. Now, when it comes to Tailscale, a little bit later, that's a lot less important. But for you inside your house, so you can use it at home as well as when you're abroad or just at the coffee shop, it is important that you set the static IP address. There'll be a link in the description on how to do that in Ubuntu down below. Set a static IP address and then also choose an upstream DNS provider. Now, I'm going to select Cloudflare because I put all of my personal DNS records in Cloudflare. And so what that means is that every time I make a change to my own personal infrastructure's DNS, it picks up those changes as quickly as possible. Beyond that, I have absolutely no recommendation of any one of these providers in this list. You pick the one that makes you feel the most comfortable and sleep the best at night. In terms of block lists, we're just going to select the defaults to everything. Query logging, yes. I'm going to show everything, and Pihole's going to carry on its merry way during the installation. And this is exactly what I was talking about here. So the installation is now complete. We now need to configure our our DHCP server. There are too many TLAs in IT, three-letter acronyms, aren't there, sometimes? But let's just go to 192.168/admin. 192.168.1.53/admin. And there is our Pi-hole up and running. So a couple of things next to do. We want to get logged in. We want to get this node logged into our tailnets. And how do we do that? We go to our machines page over here. We click on the Add Device button. And I'm going to select a Linux server because we're running Pi-hole inside Linux. And for right now, I don't have any tags on this network. And you could absolutely put this Pi-hole node as a DNS node behind like a DNS tag, and then use Tailscale's ACLs to make sure that everything has like a God mode permission. No matter what the device is on your tailnet, it can always reach that DNS node, no matter where it is. In fact, I do that in my personal infrastructure right here. So if you do want to do this, and this is a bit more of an advanced topic, so I'm not going to go into detail on this in the video, but essentially what this means is that everything, no matter where it is in my tailnet, can reach the DNS server via the subnet router. And again, we're not doing subnet routers in this video either. That's why it's a little bit more advanced. We're just putting the Pi-hole reachable via the Tailscale IP address, not the 192 local address. I'm aware that there's a lot of kind of hand waving, literally waving my hands right now, but I'm trying to keep this as simple as possible and also give some more of the advanced users a couple of breadcrumbs to follow. But anyway, if you did want to lock this down and make sure that everything can, like a zero trust model, but you still want to make sure that everything can access the Pi-hole DNS server, wherever it is, this is the grant that you would need in order to do that. Okay, so we are adding the Pi-hole node now to our tailnet. I don't think I need to do reusable. I don't need this as an exit node, although if you've got a node already on all the time inside your network, turning it on as an exit node isn't a terrible idea. And auth key, blah, blah, blah. Okay, I think we're good. So I'm now going to do generate install script, copy this to my clipboard, and again, it's going to ask me for my root. Nope, it's going to remember that my root password is, I'm already authenticated from when I installed Pi-hole just a couple of minutes ago. So Tailscale should now be installed. So we can do Tailscale status, yeah, and that's it. Pi-hole is now on my tailnet. And so if we go here to the Pi-hole instance itself, we need to get logged in. Now, what you will notice is that after installing Pi-hole for the first time, a password is generated and displayed to the user. Now, I didn't see that, so I'm going to have to scroll all the way back up here. Installation complete. Where is my part? Oh, there it is. It's right there. And this can be changed using Pi-hole set password. So why don't we do that? Why don't we just do Pi-hole set password and see what happens? Let's make this a little bigger for you all. Pi-hole set password. Sudo. Okay. So I'm going to do sudo bang bang. If you don't know what that does, bang bang in bash just substitutes the last command that you did. So I can basically run sudo Pi-hole set password without typing Pi-hole set password and just put sudo in front of it much more easily. Right, so I'm now going to type in a password. Okay, well, that was easy. Now I've set my password properly for Pi-hole, and let's get logged in. Et voila, we are done. Except, we've got a bit more configuration to do. Not only do we need to configure our DHCP server to use this as our network's local area ad blocker. I'm not going to do that in this video because that is so fraught with like every firewall, every router, it's all different, right? So what I want to do is keep this as generic as I possibly can. So we're going to make sure that this is a Pi-hole on your tailnet, and then I'm going to leave the configuration of your local network up to you. I hope that's okay. Now with our Pi-hole node logged into our tailnet, what we need to do next is allow Pi-hole to listen for incoming requests across the tailnet. By default, it's only going to listen on the local node, so for local requests from that sort of 192.168 range from that interface. It doesn't listen right now on the Tailscale interface inside the Pi-hole virtual machine. Configuring this is pretty straightforward. We go to settings and then, is it DNS or DH? Yeah, it's DNS. So settings, DNS, and then click on the basic option here to turn it onto expert mode. and then click on Permit All Origins. Now, this is, as it says, potentially a dangerous option because you are no longer only responding to devices that are one hop away on local queries. You are now binding essentially this to all interfaces on this machine, but we're not exposing this to the internet. We're only exposing this to our Tailnet and our local network. So despite the warnings, I think this is okay. And now we should be in a position where we can configure the Tailscale side of things. So how do we do that? We go back to our Tailscale admin console, we go to machines, and then we get the IP address of the Pihole instance itself. So the 173.10.49 address in my case. Yours, of course, will be different. And then we want to go into the DNS tab right here, and we want to click on Add Name Server followed by Custom. Paste in that IP address for the Pihole node. Now, we're not going to restrict this to a specific domain. We want everything to go through the Pihole, and neither are we going to select Use with Exit Node. We just want to leave this kind of as a vanilla way for people to route, like the default way for people to route their DNS queries when they're on your Tailnet. So let's just click on Save and then Override DNS Servers. Once you've clicked on Override DNS Servers, it isn't strictly necessary, but in order just to force the situation to refresh the node map and the DNS settings, what have you, I'll toggle Tailscale off and on again. And now if we come back here, let's just do a DNS test and DNS leak test, whatever. Okay, cool. And if we come into Pihole, we should start to see queries coming through. So now every single request that I'm making on a device connected to my Tailnet will now route through this Pihole no matter where it is. So if you now leave the house, you also have Adblock. Okay, it's running in your house or a VPS or wherever you've put this thing. But you now have Adblock wherever you are. And really, that's the magic of Tailscale. Like, it literally doesn't matter where you are anymore. Firewalls are kind of just last year's technology, right? I mean, it's really that's the magic of it. So you can get started with Tailscale, as I often say, for free at tailscale.com. You get 100 devices, 3 users for free, all that stuff. So you could add your family in here and have them get Adblock, you know, all those silly little games on your phone and stuff. Like, it will block the ads in those. It's wonderful, honestly. In fact, if Adblock stops working, it's one of the first things I'll get a text from my family about to say, it used to be Plex and now it's Adblock. So the other nice thing about doing it this way is you can see that the client here, you can map that client address back to a specific Tailscale IP. So 245.69, for example, that should be Baldric 245.69. In fact, let me grab my phone real quick. Let me just do one more thing on here. And so now my phone, iPhone Orange, is now connected. So 251.56, we should see that appearing in the Pihole 251.50. In fact, all of my Tailnet devices have now started picking up this new DNS routing situation that we've configured here for our Tailnet. So I've had many questions over the years about, you know, my ideal Tailscale DNS setup. And whilst Pihole certainly is a really good option, it's not the only one. There are plenty of others. There's AdguardHome, which is another great option. And there's a new one on the block called Technitium, which the reason I mentioned this one right now is because they've just added clustering to it. So if you want to have your DNS be highly available, typically the old answer would be run 2 or 3 instances of Pihole on different physical hardware, and then use something called Pihole Sync or AdGuard Sync to sync those multiple instances together so that you make a change in one place and it now reflects everywhere. Well, Technitium has just introduced a new clustering option that kind of makes those extra sync steps unnecessary. So I don't know. I haven't used Technitium yet, but I've seen a couple of videos on YouTube about it that make it look pretty compelling. So it's really up to you which option you pick. There is no wrong option. There is just whatever works for you. And Pihole at this point is a tried and true and tested option. The fact it uses Pi in the name also is irrelevant these days. You don't need a Raspberry Pi to run this thing. As I'm showing right now, we're actually running this as a virtual machine on top of Proxmox. So you could just as easily do that yourself as well. So there you go. That is a quick deep dive, I suppose, into how to configure Pihole with Tailscale. Thank you so much for watching. And until next time, I've been Alex from Tailscale.